Thunder rolls across the valley, and from the mist, a fortress rises, stone upon stone, a mountain made by human hands. Its towers pierce the gray sky, its walls ripple with banners that snap like whips in the wind. Beneath them, an army gathers, a sea of steel and fire stretching to the horizon. The siege has begun. This is the crucible of the Middle Ages, when castles stood as both sanctuary and symbol, the heart of kingdoms and the heartbeat of war. To understand how medieval castles resisted sieges is to understand the very soul of medieval warfare, endurance, ingenuity, and defiance carved into rock. Imagine standing atop those battlements, the world below aflame. The enemy's catapults thunder, their siege towers creep forward, their arrows blot out the sun, yet you hold your ground. For the castle was never merely a building, it was a statement: you shall not pass. Its design, born from centuries of blood and learning, was a masterpiece of defense, a living organism built to withstand the unimaginable. The first great fortresses of Europe rose in the chaos that followed Rome's fall. At first, they were wooden motte and bailey castles, earth mounds crowned by timber walls, encircled by moats. Quick to build, but fragile, one spark and they were ash. So the lords of war turned to stone. By the 11th century, the age of the stone castle had begun, cold, enduring, magnificent. The great keeps of Normandy and England rose like thunderclouds, thick-walled and unyielding. The keep, or donjon, was the heart of resistance, a final refuge. Its walls could be 3 meters thick, its entrance reached only by a narrow stair that could be easily defended. It was fortress and home, weapon and warning. But defense was not only in the stone, it was in the art of delay, the science of survival. Every feature of a medieval castle was born from the mind of a soldier who had seen death. Look closer, the walls curve and twist, denying the enemy a flat surface to strike. The gatehouse, the most vulnerable point, becomes a death trap, layered with portcullises and murder holes from which boiling oil or heavy stones could rain down. Above, the battlements hide archers who can shoot through narrow arrow loops, giving death but never receiving it. Towers rise at the corners, projecting outward so defenders can fire along the base of the wall, turning every inch of ground into a killing zone. The moat is no mere ornament. It denies siege engines a foothold and turns tunneling into drowning. Every design, every stone, speaks one word: resist. When the armies came, the siege began as a battle of patience. A castle could starve an army as easily as an army could starve a castle. Inside those walls, months or even years of grain and salted meat were stored, with wells dug deep to reach hidden water. Pigeons carried messages, and secret tunnels sometimes allowed for supplies or ambushes. The defenders lived by a rhythm, manning the walls by day, repairing by night, and praying always that winter would come before the enemy's courage held. Outside, the besiegers built their own cities of wood and canvas, ringing the fortress with siege engines, trebuchets that hurled stones heavier than a man, mongonals that smashed towers, and battering rams that pounded at the gates like giants. Yet stone endured. For every wall that cracked, another layer stood behind it. The concentric castle, perfected in the 13th century, was the ultimate evolution. Multiple rings of defense surrounded the heart, each higher than the last. If one wall fell, defenders could retreat to the next and rain destruction upon their foes from above. The castles of Edward I in Wales, Harlech, Caernarfon, Beaumaris were masterpieces of this kind, their walls reflecting not only power but psychology, the art of breaking an enemy. This will before the stones ever fell. To attack a castle was to fight not only its garrison, but its spirit. The defenders knew their home, their strength, their purpose. The besiegers, often cold, hungry, and far from safety, faced death at every approach. The very air around a castle seemed to resist. Yet some sieges broke through by cunning. The trick of undermining, tunneling beneath the walls, propping the ceiling with timber, then setting it ablaze, could collapse entire towers. In 1215, at Rochester Castle, King John's army used the fat of 40 pigs to fuel the fire that brought down a corner of the keep. Still, even then, the defenders retreated deeper inside, turning ruin into a rampart. At other times, deception triumphed where brute force failed. At Chateau Gaillard, Richard the Lionheart's masterpiece, French soldiers found a forgotten drain and climbed through it, emerging inside the outer courtyard like ghosts from the stone itself. The castle fell not to siege, but to a single overlooked weakness, proof that even the mightiest walls depend on human vigilance. But most sieges did not end in glory. They ended in starvation, in silence, in surrender. When the supplies ran out, when the wells ran dry, when disease took hold, the proud garrisons were forced to open their gates. Yet even then, their resistance shaped history. Each day they held out bought time for relief armies to arrive, for winter to freeze rivers, for diplomacy to change the course of war. The castle's purpose was never to be invincible. It was to endure long enough that the world outside would change first. The greatest of all medieval fortresses, cracked des Chevaliers in Syria, stood for centuries as the Crusaders' mightiest stronghold. Its concentric walls rose like waves, its towers bristled with death. When the Sultan Saladin faced it, he did not waste his men against the stone. Instead, he laid siege and waited. Years passed before the defenders, deceived by a forged letter of surrender, finally yielded. Even then, the castle's legend endured, admired even by those who conquered it. In Europe, the science of siege and defense became an arms race. With every new engine of destruction came new walls, new moats, new forms of cunning. Machicolations, overhanging galleries that let defenders drop stones or boiling water directly down the wall, turned the castle into a vertical battlefield. By the 14th century, the castle had reached its zenith, a fusion of art and warfare. And yet, like all fortresses, its time would come to an end. Gunpowder changed everything. Cannonballs smashed where trebuchets had failed. The thunder of artillery made even the thickest walls tremble. By the 15th century, the proud towers of old were being replaced by low, angular bastions, new forts designed to deflect shot. The age of the medieval castle was fading, its role shifting from defense to decoration. Yet even as they fell, they refused to be forgotten. They became symbols of loyalty, of resistance, of endurance. Their ruins, standing against the sky, became monuments to the stubbornness of human hope. Today, as we walk through their silent halls, we can still feel the echo of that defiance. We see the grooves worn into the stone where the portcullis once rose, the scorch marks of siege fire, the narrow stairways built to force an attacker to fight uphill. We hear the creak of the drawbridge, the hiss of arrows, the shouts of men who refused to yield. We remember that these castles were more than stone. They were stories of survival written in architecture. The siege was not merely a battle, it was a test of the human will to endure. For those within, it was a world unto itself, the blacksmith hammering weapons, the women tending the wounded, the priest offering last rites, the children learning that courage sometimes means simply waiting. To resist a siege was to look death in the eye day after day and still raise the flag above the battlements each dawn. It was to believe that walls, and the people who built them, could outlast fear. So when we ask how medieval castles resisted sieges, the answer lies not only in their architecture, but in their spirit. They resisted with stone, yes, but also with faith, with strategy, and with time. They resisted with the knowledge that sometimes resistance itself is victory. And even now, as ivy creeps over their walls, those castles still stand, proud and silent, their stones whispering across the ages. They tell us that there was once a time when men built mountains to protect what they loved, and when courage was measured not by conquest, but by how long one could hold the line. For in the end, every siege ends the same way. The armies depart, the banners fall, but the stones remain. Thank you for watching. If you found this journey into the past as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more stories carved in stone.